The following video is of great importance to me. It concerns a topic that I feel will be of significant consequence for the history of not just philosophy, but also spirituality and society. This video concerns a work of my own, an obsession of mine for over 10 years. In 2020, I finally secured the publication of this work, and it is now just a few days from its official release. In this video, I present the preface to my book, The Shape of Knowledge, an introduction to Paraphilosophy, which describes the experience that started me on this journey, as well as an overview of the goals of the project. I hope that you find this of interest, and I sincerely thank you for your time. I never set out to become a philosopher. I don't call myself one today, and I wasn't drawn to my perspective through intensive philosophical study. Philosophy was thrust upon me at a moment of weakness, when a crack emerged in what I thought I knew without it. This is not a typical text on philosophy, and I am very grateful that you would allow me a moment to explain why you might want to read it. Though this book has little interest in religious debates, it makes sense to start with the topic, because I gained the first seeds of atheism at a very young age. When I was around 7, I first realized that not everyone believed what we were taught is true, and by 11 I had become an atheist. I did a project in my second or third year of school on George Carlin, and then I discovered Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins, and I was enamoured. I was too young to acknowledge any deeper significance to the world being devoid of objective meaning. I just found it very interesting why people believed things we did not know as true. Eventually, I stopped spending much time thinking about religion, for atheism had just become a known. I read Albert Camus' The Myth of Sisyphus, a book which seeks to shed light on the conflict between humankind's desire to find meaning in life and its inability to do so. Camus concluded that our capacity to create meaning artificially and find joy in such meaning can compensate for its innate meaninglessness, that life might be considered meaningful if only we remain aware of the fabricated nature of the meaning we give it. This message was sufficient for me for a while, but as I approached the end of my teens, and I struggled with the question of what fabrication of meaning would be sufficient, my perspective rapidly declined into nihilism. I never wanted to waste time on the relative. I wanted to know what was best, and I wanted that. Insofar as there was not a best, I wanted nothing. I had created a problem in my mind that did not seem possible to solve, a first encounter with paradox, perhaps, and I was lost. I had always liked books, and so I naively thought that maybe I could follow in the footsteps of those atheist authors I admired. I started reading more, all while my pessimism and desperation grew larger, and I never could have predicted where this interest would lead me. At the close of 2012, I was reading Lawrence Krauss's A Universe from Nothing, a book which explores how it might be possible for a meaningless universe to arise in the first place. Krauss posited that certain phenomena present in empty space could allow for the generation of our universe out of nothing, defying the cosmological conjecture, out of nothing, nothing comes. However, Krauss's idea of nothing wasn't what most people would think of when hearing the term nothing. Instead, it contained all of the laws of physics and the entire contents of quantum field theory. For Krauss, nothing was the absence of physicality in all its forms, including those of space and time, but arguably still something. I'd never really worried about the before of matter, and, rightly or wrongly, I had interpreted this as meaning that science's best guess at the origin of matter was found in something which exists, but is not physical itself. Suddenly, flashes were going off in my mind. I started questioning everything I thought I knew, and because I had trained so long not to trust anything whose truth I could question, suddenly these beliefs were no good, and they collapsed. And it all collapsed, as though these beliefs were the scaffolding holding together my entire outlook on life. It collapsed, and then there was nothing, emptiness. I knew nothing, and I knew it. I knew nothing, and I knew it. This thought reverberated in my mind. How can there be knowing if there is nothing? There was nothing rational or intellectual about this feeling. I knew, and I could feel my knowing. It was an absolute preconceptual conviction of necessity, that the emptiness is full, that the is and is not are somehow united, that the absolute is a paradox that cannot be explained, but can nevertheless be known, because I knew it. Save for the flashy description I have just provided, I don't want to mystify this experience any more than it should be. I recognized that it was a psychological phenomenon that had been cultivated by my unique situation. The content of the experience is not important here, particularly for a work of philosophic intentions. The importance of the experience is the effect it had on me, for it is this effect that led me to write this book. Whatever that experience was, it showed me something I did not think was possible before. It showed me that within an instant it is possible for even the most sceptical and nihilistic of minds to feel absolutely certain of the importance, beauty, and perfection of existence. I report this as an account of this effect, and my life following it is evidence of its power. It was not a feeling of assurance like the one we have in response to a near incontrovertible scientific theory, nor of the certitude that 1 + 1 = 2. It was not an assurance of anything we can conceive, but an assurance of the existence of an assurance greater than anything we can conceive. It was an experience of untarnishable persuasive power, for which I am aware my rhetoric is not, but that is why I have written this book. Immediately following the experience, my task was already set. There was no time to sit in amazement. There was no question that I would not spend every available moment of my life, for as long as it would take me, in finding a way to reveal this meaning. There was also no question that I would attempt to convey it without being able to convey it with rigour. And even if I'm ultimately wrong in all this, which is a natural and persistent doubt of the mind, nothing could stop me from risking it all. And if I should fail completely, I'll still be happy I tried. A secondary facet of the experience that struck me was that my mind's attempt to rationalize this emptiness was generating a secondary experience of duality. As I formed thoughts about it, mirrored were sensations of meaning, and every successive iteration of an attempted rationalization drew me further and further away. Taken together, the sensation was that the interaction between this nothing and my awareness of it was generating an autonomously expanding duality as an attempt to relativize the paradox at the heart of experience, and that this process was the origin of my perceptions of a subjective and objective environment. The experience was not merely compelling because of the truth it revealed, but because this truth was embedded into the very structure of the experience. The process of the remembering and forgetting of the experience was the truth that was being remembered and forgotten. It was an experience of the very necessity of the development of duality out of the nondual. This quality has been my guiding light in subsequent years, for it was a distinct quality of complementarity, of two interdependent constructs who rely on each other for their own existence, and whose relation is a consequence of the actualization of the potential. These constructs were like two different ways of looking at the phenomenon of experience, and I fell into the habit of referring to them as meaning and reason respectively. By reason, I am referring to a discretely encoded or mechanistic record of experience, and something that could theoretically be written down or communicated. By meaning, I am referring to the continuous felt quality of experience in the immediate moment, which is never communicated, and never remembered. If reason answers the question how, then meaning answers the question why. The two viewpoints were not unfamiliar, for everything we perceive is perceived through the languages of meaning and reason, respectively. I was merely recognizing them at a very basic and unrefined level. All attempts at knowledge are an attempt to acquire a reason how, or a meaning why, and I felt the two as aspects of a single thing, which cannot be conceived as singular. I realized that each view carries an aspect of the truth, that each is incomplete in isolation, and that a disproportionate adherence to either leads the individual to a biased perspective on the natural world. Meaning leads to an overly finalistic and spiritualistic view on existence, reason leads to an overly mechanistic and nihilistic view, and truth lies in the connection and correlation between them. I saw myself to be leaning heavily towards reason, and I saw that I was ultimately no different from the theist who leans to the side of meaning. It is therefore from the view of a reconciliation between the opposites that this work begins. My enthusiasm following this initial experience was unshakable, though I had a very long way to go to being able to express myself with clarity. I came from the side of reason, so discussing the experience on the basis of anecdote was out of the question. I was interested in proof, regardless of whether proof was possible, and acknowledging that any proof would still be one side of the whole. Several attempts at developing this proof followed in the subsequent years, and at the start of 2019 I would begin my final effort. It has been extraordinarily difficult for me, but this book is the result, released a decade following the initial event, and I'm quite content with it. I could not have done much more. The goal of the following text is to establish the foundations of a new philosophical science called paraphilosophy. This is not a philosophical theory, but rather the structure of possible theories. The methodology developed to identify this structure is scientific, in the sense that it is an analysis of the ideas that philosophers have developed in our efforts to rationalize experience over the course of the history of discourse. Paraphilosophy is a consequence of the establishment of this structure as something that exists ontologically. In Part 1, I describe the no-progress problem of philosophy, which is that we are unable to decisively discriminate between the subjectivist and objectivist perspectives on any given philosophical problem, and that this prevents philosophy from making consensual forward movement. I then introduce the principle of complementarity, first as it is given by Niels Bohr in theoretical physics, and second as it emerges in psychology, as explained by William James and Carl Jung. By using Jung's investigations into typology, I make a first presentation of the structure referred to as the dialectical matrix, here distinguishing 4 classes of intellectual temperament. In Part 2, I begin by abstracting this structure away from psychology, so that we may determine whether the same structure can model the various perspectives philosophers have developed in regard to certain basic concepts in philosophy, as well as the theories which are grounded in these perspectives. At the end of Part 2, we are able to conclude that the dialectical matrix is indeed sufficient to categorize, define, and demarcate the ideas we can come up with in regard to any of the major problems of philosophy. I finish with an analysis of the correlations between perspectives from the same part of the structure in regard to different problems, revealing consistent themes. In Part 3, I provide a brief description of the history of logic, particularly as it relates to the foundations of mathematics. I discuss the unavoidable presence of self-reference in logic, emerging through Russell's paradox, Gödel's incompleteness theorems, and Tarski's undefinability theorem, and the requirement of non-classical logic to provide a transparent account of truth. I describe how the various approaches to non-classical logic can be modelled by the dialectical matrix, and end with a discussion on the relation between self-reference and consciousness, with particular focus on the work of Douglas Hofstadter. And in Part 4, I begin by re-examining a quadrant of the dialectical matrix that was previously explained to be self-contradictory, and therefore empty. At this point, we are able to determine that this perspective arises from a conflation of the subject and object in a similar manner to the set theoretic and semantic paradoxes. Through a deeper analysis of this paradoxical quadrant, we are able to identify it with the phenomenon of self-reference, and ultimately self-consciousness itself. I proceed with an examination of the dialectical matrix in light of its inclusion of this self-referential component, and reveal the entire structure to be a fractal within the basic architecture of experience. The self-proving character of the possibility of self-conception, which both includes and is included by the dialectical matrix, is the means to proving that the matrix exists as both the subject and object of all thought. The remainder of the text discusses the philosophical consequences of the establishment of paraphilosophy, our new philosophical science. I do hope that you enjoy the text, and I hope that I have done this bold task justice. And that ends the preface to The Shape of Knowledge, an introduction to paraphilosophy. If you'd like to learn more about the thesis of the book, there are several videos on my personal channel which explain it. I will provide links and information in the description and pinned comment. I look forward to hearing from you over there, and I hope that you have a good day.